Welcome to Klick Into Purpose, where we talk about conversations that actually move people and organizations forward. I'm Nicco LoCascio, and alongside my co-host, Lara Klick, we explore what it really takes to lead well in today's world. This podcast is for leaders, professionals, and anyone who wants to communicate more clearly, build trust, and lead with intention, not just with authority. Each episode will break down real life scenarios, share practical strategies, and give you tools you can actually use, whether you're leading a team, an organization, or just navigating tough conversations in your own life. Today, we're going to be talking about work life balance. So, if you're ready to build healthy habits, let's click into it. And I will begin by asking Lara, what are your thoughts on work life balance?
So, my primary thought is that it is a work in progress for me. I am actually of a generation where I was taught that you give your entire life to your work and you work very, very long hours. And so I actually really admire people who came after me who have found that balance. So today I am actually going to be interviewing Nicco, which is a little different than last month, because quite frankly, you do this so much better than I do. And I would love to hear your perspectives on work-life balance. For me, it's an aspiration, not an activity. So let me turn that question around to you, Nicco. In a grand kind of scheme of things conversation, what are your initial thoughts on work-life balance?
I think there's a reason why the workforce, especially in social work, and I'm sure in a lot of different areas in the workforce, is burnout. I mean, you read articles all day long on burnout. It's just rampant, it's everywhere. And I think a lot of that has to do with not maintaining a healthy work-life balance. We're stressed, we don't know what to do with it, we're not exercising or we're not eating right or we're spending all these hours at work and it's in return causing a bunch of burnout, which then is leading staff leaving organizations and organizations then having to find replacement, which is costing thousands and thousands of dollars. And so I think it's necessary to have work-life balance in the workforce if you want to be successful as an organization or even as an individual.
I appreciate that. And from an academic perspective, and I've read the articles and I agree with it. And still, coming out of a healthcare setting, which is a 24/7 setting, much like social work can be, it was very hard to disconnect. I
Mhm.
know that I spent many years where I was expected to be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I worked weekends, holidays, got calls in the middle of the night. And the general expectation was that you were available to answer that phone when it rang. And before we had phones, because I'm old as dirt and we didn't have cell phones when I started in my career, you had a pager that was attached to your hip. And
Yep.
again, when that pager went off, there was an expectation that you answered it. If the weather was going to be bad, whether it was a blizzard when I was up north or a hurricane when I moved south, you took your sleeping bag and your air mattress and you moved in for the event. And it's just a very different approach to what a lot of other industries see. And I agree with you. I think it leads to a level of burnout that in the helping professions are significant, especially because people who go into helping professions are people who genuinely care about others and want to be there for someone else. And so I think that looking at how we help people decompress is really important. I say that as someone who literally was creating health concerns in myself because of working 80 hours a week. And so I'm really excited to hear your tips on how to create that balance between a job that you care deeply for and putting your own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah, and I look forward to the conversation. It's something that I care deeply about because it's really sad to see what's going on in our workforce, and you see how much of a major issue work-life balance and burnout is right now. So it's an important conversation we're having.
Well, then I'm really glad that our listeners determined that this was our number two conversation. So, with that being said, let's get started. So, I think you know I'm a data gal. I love data. Data is my love language. And as such, when you look at work-life balance, people kind of approach it like a math problem, 1 + 1 = 2. But is that really how we should be approaching it? Is that the right way to look at it? In your experience, what's something that people don't tell you about the emotional cost of maintaining work-life balance where 1 + 1 does not always equal 2?
Yeah, I think the emotional toll from that is if you're trying to have a work-life balance and you're trying not to be on your phone as much or be super involved, there's this fear that you're gonna miss something, right? There's this fear, I'm gonna miss this email, I'm gonna miss this call, and something terrible is gonna happen, and it's gonna be crucial to the organization, and it's gonna be my fault. So when you try to put boundaries in place, it can put a toll on you, right? Because you're always constantly worried. And then you have some people that are frankly workaholics and they want to keep working. They don't know how to stop, right? And that's a whole nother conversation that we'll get into a little bit later. But that presents its own kind of issues with doing that. So I think for me, what I've found is one, making sure that we're training our leaders to delegate so they can handle the situations that can be handled and they're not having to reach out to you constantly, that they can handle the small issue. And I think you do that by setting the expectations with your leaders and saying, hey, if it's an emergent, and I'm curious to hear your perspective because it might be different in the healthcare setting. But for me, how it worked typically, I was Monday through Friday, but I was salary, and I'm a director over a program for juveniles on house arrest, which is, of course, highly intense, and there's a lot that can go wrong. So it was still expected for me to have my phone if there's any major issues that went through. And so what I would do and tell my leaders if it's an emergency to call me. But if not, it should be handled, the leader should handle that situation. And so that's how you have to set those boundaries with your team as well. And then also make sure it's important to be checking emails, but not to be just constantly scrolling. So setting those boundaries for yourself. But curious, Laura, your perspective in the healthcare setting.
Absolutely. Well, and what you described to me really talks about building up that high trust environment, telling your team members, I trust you to handle this. You're empowered and I trust you. And while that's great in theory, I know that in my world, I've actually experienced the opposite.
Hmm.
When I was very early in my career, I recall I was reporting to someone and I mentioned that I had seen a story on the 6 o'clock news the night before. Excuse me. And she very specifically said, you were home by 6 o'clock. And the way she said it gave me such a strong message that that was not acceptable behavior in that organization. And I've never forgotten it. I had another leader at another organization that literally stood in front of their senior leaders and said, in your position, there's no such thing as work-life balance. That is not an expectation. The expectation is you're going to respond to what you need to respond to. And that particular individual actually called me for both my mother-in-law and my father-in-law's funeral. I was on the phone in another room during the funeral services, not the actual services, on the phone with that individual who expected me to have a full conversation even after I said, I'm at my mother-in-law's funeral. And so if you think about the messages that people can give as leaders, they can change instantaneously their external conversation about work-life balance with an expectation they give that I don't know that they realize they're giving. The reason you scroll through your emails is I can tell you that I have gone into the office many times and people have said, didn't you see my email? So I think that as a leader, what was important is to try to create a buffer between me and my team and have them recognize that I was a very senior level leader. I was in an executive role, but I did not expect them to do that. But I recognized my hypocrisy. I said so many times, do as I say, not as I do. I don't expect you to do this. My job is different than yours. I used to tell people I sit in a different chair because they would see what organizationally I was going through. And frankly, they wanted to shield me as well. But it goes back to if you're doing those things, I think what you're really saying to your team is, I don't trust you. And isn't that destructive to an
Mhm.
organization?
Now, you talked about executive. I'm curious in the healthcare
Mhm.
side, what about the front line people that are they typically salary and they are expected to work these long hours? Or are they hourly?
So the true front lines, the people that are at the bedside or at the reception desk, those positions are hourly positions. And so there are protections associated with that. And I'm sure that your company watched every dime, just like every company I've ever
Mhm.
worked for. So incidental overtime and putting people on the clock, that's something that you were always aware of. But what that did is that the second you moved into that salaried position, into that leadership position, your world suddenly changed.
Mhm.
And I know that in every organization I've worked for, we had a phenomenon where we would promote people into leadership and then they would calculate how many hours they worked and they'd actually step out of leadership because they recognized they were making less money per hour
Mm.
because they no longer got the overtime and the hours were intense. And sometimes it needs to be, right? I talked about, you have a weather event. Yes, your hours are going to be intense. During COVID, the hours were insane. I was working 7 days a week, usually about 18 to 20 hours a day. I mean, that was insanity. But that should be an outlier. It should not be the
Mhm.
norm. And so, again, for my team, even if my team were salaried employees, we worked on how can we be collaborative? Can we take call for one another? Can we say to our front line, does this have to be resolved now? Or is this something that can wait for 4 hours? Is this something that is a true emergency? Then I
Mhm.
want you to call me. But if it's not a true emergency, can you send me an email and I'll get back to you when I wake up? And what my leadership team realized is they didn't have those transparent conversations with their teams to define when is it emergency. And that was a fascinating exercise we went through. We went through it as a leadership team, and I had all my leaders, all my managers, and my directors sit down and define as a group what is an email, what is a text message, what is a pick up the phone and make a phone call. And we literally kind of created severity levels to different crises to
Yeah.
determine when do you pick up a phone and you're calling Lara because she's going to be picking up a phone and calling our marketing department to be prepared for potential calls from reporters or our executives, our senior level executives to get them in on the issue. But the definition was what was important in that. And we realized we had never done that. And boy, did it change things once we did.
Now, let me ask you, as a executive role, is it possible to have work-life balance as an executive in healthcare?
I think it's a different
Mm.
definition.
Yeah.
I think that it's work life, not necessarily balance, as
Mhm.
much as it is work life integration. Now, that being said, you're never off. And so, do I think that that's the right thing? Not necessarily. Do I think it's the real thing? Yes, it's the real thing. Even when you look at your evenings and your weekends, you're going to functions, you're out in the community, you're you're representing the organization whether you're on site or not because you
Mhm.
have an online presence that is
Yeah.
associated with your role. I think that you do have to find places that you can try to keep sacrosanct. I had a weird one. Even during COVID, I was we had calls 7 days a week, 4 different calls a day. And every day you were on those 4 calls, 7 days a week. Once the theme parks opened up, I can tell you, I took more than one call sitting on the grass at the hub at Disney World because I was still on the phone, but I just needed to have that call with a Dole Whip. So that's more what work life integration would look like. I've taken business calls waiting to ride Hagrid's at Universal Studios. So you have to find your victories within that
Yeah.
environment.
Got it, okay, that makes sense, yeah, and we've talked about that before. One of our first meetings, we talked about the difference between work-life balance and work-life integration. When you're talking about being executive or being high up in certain expectations, it may not always be, um, reasonable to have work-life balance because you need to be working these hours, you need to make sure things are being taken care of.
Well, and I think you and I also have roles. So if you're a founder and you
Yeah.
have your own business, and for founders that I know, when you are at the top of the organizational chart, that's where work-life integration comes in. So, if I'm getting ready to take my annual vacation with my husband that we take every year, and if my phone rings while I'm there, I well, it depends whether I've had a couple of margaritas yet or not. If I've had a couple margaritas, maybe I won't answer it right now, but believe you me, I will be answering that phone call within
Yeah.
a very reasonable time frame because that's what you do when you do it. The difference is that I've gone from working 80-hour work weeks to having something much more controlled, and my blood pressure thanks me.
Yeah. And I think you brought up something important too that I think a lot of leaders don't do is putting those systems in place and saying, hey, this is a text message, this is an email, and this is when you call me, because that will save you a lot of time and it will teach them what are the policies and procedures and teach them the leadership skills necessary so they're not always going to you for the answers and they can figure out and know the answers there.
Well, and the other thing is helping your team to know when they need permission and
Yeah.
when they need perspective. Because
Mm.
that's different. Permission is different than perspective. So if you're looking at something that has danger to the brand, to the organization, or to safety, you probably need permission. But if you're looking for advice on a decision you're going to need, you're looking for perspective. But you bring up a good point because the definition of expectation is something in so many ways as a leader, as a contributor within an organization, at organizations across the country, that's a stage that is missed frequently. Taking the time to sit down and say, let's sit down and set forward the expectations related to this specific avenue. I'm going to tell you when I did that, it was life changing. It
Yeah.
was truly life changing because if there's ambiguity, people will err on the side of coming to you, and if there's clarity, they'll err on the side of, I have permission to do this. And if I make a mistake, I know that it's going to be a different kind of conversation. And then the other side of that is, you'd better not be a hypocrite as a leader, right? So if you give people permission to make decisions and make mistakes, and then you come down on them afterwards, you've negated everything.
Yeah.
So. But I'm a big believer in the vulnerable expert. So I mentioned me taking calls literally while I was trying to help my husband through losing both of his parents. Where is somewhere that was somewhere where my work self and my home self came into conflict. And I believe in being vulnerable and saying that that was a time when I did not necessarily make the right choices. Have you had an example of a time where that kind of work self and home self have collided in a way that made you a better leader, that you've learned from it, and that you have perspectives you can share related to what do you do in those moments?
Yeah. So dealing with juveniles and dealing with high pressure, high intensity, it can cause a lot of stress and a lot of strain, right? And so when you're dealing with that, a lot of times you take that stress, that anxiety, that worry home. And I found that it was at times affecting relationships, affecting friendships, because you just have your mind set on work or something going wrong and it's not healthy and you can almost find yourself like being avoidant. I found myself at times wanting to be avoidant, not really wanting to have long conversations or be socializing because it was such a long day. So I found that my work life was starting to affect my personal life, and what I had to find that I had to do to fix that is I found out I was not managing stress well at all, at work or at home. And so one of the things I had to do to fix that is number one, I had to fix my eating habits because that affects so many different things, right? When we're not eating healthy, we just have this brain fog, we don't feel great. So cutting out fast food. And then secondly is finding something to relieve that stress, which was going to the gym. And so I would try to go to the gym 5 days a week. And it's crazy how much of a difference that you feel when you're eating healthy and you're exercising compared to when you're not. It just changes everything. And I lost 60 pounds in 6 months just by doing that. And I found by finding stress relievers, by eating healthy, by going to the gym, it was allowing me to be a better leader because I could think more clearly, I could communicate more clearly. I wasn't groggy or I wasn't brain fogged. So it truly changed how I would operate at work and how I felt at work and in my personal life. So I think it's so important. We're so busy. A lot of us work long hours. It's like, I just can't make it to the gym, or we're on the run. I'll just go to McDonald's. But when we're talking about work life balance, it's so important to maintain a healthy diet in some form. I know everyone can't go to the gym. Maybe that's going for a walk or investing in a hobby. During COVID, there was not a lot to do. And so me and my parents really got into kayaking. And so we would go to all the different springs and we would go kayaking. So I would just encourage people who are struggling to find that balance is eat healthy, find a way to relieve the stress, whether it's a gym or a hobby that you have. And I think you would very much see the difference in your productivity at work and how you have relationships in your personal life.
Yeah, that certainly is something. I know that when I would get busy, the first thing I would lose is that afternoon walk that I used to like to take. And it's interesting because that conflict between work and home life. So I'm the mother of two. And they're over my shoulder. They're always looking behind me. So when my kids were little, I often say one of my biggest regrets in life was anytime I missed time with them. And so when they were very young, well, when they were very young, my son was very sick. So he was in and out of hospitals, and I used to have to sleep on his floor. So I averaged 3 to 4 hours of sleep at night because I was still earning the income to support us while he was sick and things were going on. And then when he went into remission was right about the time that my daughter took up travel sports. And so I had always been very active with both of my children. Both of my children did scouts, and I was a leader for their scouting troops. And then they both took up sports, and I became a supporter of the sports team, was the team mom for a while. And at some point, my kids said to me, Mom, when do you take care of you? And so that dynamic of what's going to happen and wanting to do it all, it was actually the kids that would tell me that I needed to take time for me. And then I started recognizing that import. For me, my time is early in the morning. I'm an early bird. I wake up really ridiculously early. But I go and I have a chair and I sit it and I read a book that will rot my brain, nothing serious, no business books, something that is absolute trash. And it's my time. And so finding the opportunity to have that my time is very, very important to me as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's either something in the morning, and if you're not in a morning person, then in the afternoon or evening, but finding something to get your mind off of work, not being stuck in that cycle of what's going wrong or all these issues. And I think that just contributes to mental health issues, it contributes to burnout. And so finding ways that you can enjoy yourself and have life and not just be solely focused on your work. There's so many great things about life that we can get to enjoy, and it's hard if your mind's always stuck on work.
For sure. And I'm working on something right now called active permission. And so creating kind of an accountability partner to help you to see some of these concepts through. So when you identify someone who will keep you honest and you give them active permission to call you on it. And so when they see you doing things outside of what you've said you're going to do, whether it's going to the gym or eating right or taking one day a month to just be a me day and completely pamper myself. So, do you have someone who's kind of your accountability partner who will call you out when you're overextending yourself or can help to keep you honest?
So just to be vulnerable and honest, when I saw that question when I was preparing, and the answer is no, I really don't have someone that can hold me accountable if I'm working too much or if I'm not eating healthy or I'm not going to the gym. I have, family that I've noticed, and like, you seem very stressed, or friends that I've noticed you haven't gone to the gym. So I've had people that have encouraged me and have helped me, but I don't think I've ever had like a point person that would hold me accountable and say, "Hey, you're too stressed about work. You're not going to the gym." So I honestly don't think I've had that, but it would be incredibly beneficial to have that because it's holding you honest and it's holding you true and it's holding you accountable. And so I think that's actually one thing now that you mention it is something that I need to find. And I have a lot of mentors in my life. I've people have poured into me so much. And so I think just having that conversation to hold me accountable and to come to them when I'm feeling vulnerable and to help me through that.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you have someone that does that for you?
So I have two someones that do that for me. The first one is the one who uses persuasion and positivity, and the other one tells me like it is. So my stepmother, who is also a social worker, is really my outlook or my outlet when things are getting hard. She and I will talk in the car, or now that she actually has a little bit more time, we'll go spend a day together at the parks. She has an annual pass. I have an annual pass. And we just go get lunch because it's the halfway point between the two of us. And so she's my gentle nudge. And so she helps me talk through my stressors and figure out what my motivations are. And then I raised a mini me. So my oldest child is now 23, and she is wonderfully blunt with her mother. I am very blessed with my children. And my oldest and I talk usually 2 to 3 times a day because we are each other's supports in times. And if something's going on, she is the one that will be brutally honest with me. Mom, you're killing yourself again. And so I value both of those approaches. And so I actually get two, and both are two people who I know love me. And so it absolutely helps me to stay honest.
Yeah. And when I was in my previous organization, I had a coworker who was in a different program, but we were on the same level. And so he dealt with a lot of high intensity situations. And so talking with him, I was able to vent out my issues and we were able to talk and feel better. And something I wanted to point out, especially when we're talking about burnout and work-life balance as leaders, making sure we're not venting down to our staff, that we're allowing that our stresses come down because that will affect the culture. It will make it toxic and then they'll start complaining. So, as a leader, you never want to vent down to your team. It's always venting up either to your superior or like someone on your level that might be in another program, but never venting down to your team ever.
That's a great tip. And that's actually a great transition because in the workplace, a lot of times busy is a sign of honor.
Yeah.
And so people actually get into this competition mode of who's busier than who else. And it's interesting because busy is one of the words I've defined as a tragic word, because if you're busy, it implies that you somehow are a victim. And so when I teach people how to change tragic words into magic words, I talk about changing from busy to popular. I'm very popular right now. Many people are seeking my assistance. And I know that sounds a little corny, but it does make a difference. But in your world, when you've been extra super popular, i.e., busy, do you find that it becomes like a leader to leader busy competition? And how do you break that habit? How do you make it so that it's about improving process? Because if we're super busy, doesn't that mean our processes are broken? So, what are your thoughts in terms of the busy competition that goes on?
Yeah, so I would like to start by something I saw Kevin O'Leary post, and he's from Shark Tank. This is what he said, and this is someone who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars and something that he just realized. So he said, I used to brag about working 18 hours a day, and I was wrong. When I was building my first company, I thought exhaustion was a badge of honor. In reality, it was unhealthy and unproductive. Burned out founders make bad decisions, and bad decisions destroy companies. Today, I work harder than ever, just smarter. I sleep properly, I train every day, I protect my diet, and I guard my focus. I don't make million-dollar decisions after 1 p.m. For us, it's not million-dollar decisions, but it might be crucial decisions, because sharp judgment beats brute force every time. Productivity beats hours, longevity beats ego. Discipline beats chaos. If you're building a company and running on fumes, you're not a hero, you're a liability. I don't invest in exhausted leaders. I invest in sharp, healthy, focused leaders who can win for decades, not just survive for a year. That's the new standard. And so I found that so interesting, his commentary on being busy as a badge of honor and him realizing through all these years that that's not the case, that we need people that are well rested, well energized, ready to go, that are healthy. And so it can never turn into this toxicity when you're competing with other leaders, or I'm more busier than you, I do more than you. And so I think that becomes, quite dangerous. And I think that's something we need to run away from, is it being this honor, this badge of I work so much, I deserve this. And I don't think it's good at all. And we need to move away from that.
I mean, it really is, and it's something where it becomes a competition of who is kind of the biggest victim in the room because I work harder than you do. And if we could get away from that, it would be absolutely amazing. Similar to that, I think it's interesting. I have learned a lot through my career. And one of the things I've identified as a successful day is if I don't have to make any decisions. And when I was leading people, if I just asked the right questions rather than making the decisions, it was a paradigm shift that made my team stronger than ever, and it made our output better than ever. And so I think that part of that badge of honor of busy is I am in charge. I'm very important. I'm creating all of these decisions, and removing yourself from that and saying, no, my job is to empower other people to make decisions. My job is to encourage my entire team to be efficient and get out of work on time. And if we can't do that, we have a process problem.
Yep.
So how can we, whether it's doing, I'm sure that you've done this in your career, the stop, start, continue.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but we never put anything on the stop end.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is start and continue. You have to stop. You know, I used to send out very complex reports. They would take hours to produce. And one of the things I did very intentionally is if I didn't get any questions about a report for a period of time, I wouldn't send it the next time. And if no one noticed, that's not a helpful report. And I stopped doing it. And so, was that a risk for me? Sure, it was, because people see volume as success. But in my mind, that was inefficient use of the company's resources.
Yeah.
So I just would stop.
I think you brought up an important part in that we need to do a better job at training our leaders and training our teams of managing conflict and managing issues. We can't be the answer for everything, because if we just answer all the questions, then they're not learning. And like you said, the system, something's not working. The system is broken. And it becomes, like you said, this badge of honor that I have all this information, I can answer it, I know how to run. But if you're doing that, it's toxic and no one's learning. So you have to make sure that you're setting up your leaders and your team for success to know how to handle certain issues, know how to have certain conversations. And like you said, trusting them. You have to trust them and give them wiggle room to make mistakes, and not being a hypocrite if they do make a mistake, but walking them through it and seeing how they don't make that same mistake again.
Identifying what was their thought process,
Yeah,
because they may have had a great idea and it doesn't always work out. That's the only way we learn is through our mistakes.
yeah.
So, just a couple more questions because I want us to make sure that we get to our final tip. So, my next question is, we talked a little bit about an escalation mandate. Do you have one for your personal life? I mean, are there signs and symptoms that you will see that say, I need to take a personal day or I need to take a break, that you give yourself the permission to prioritize yourself over your work life?
When I get to a point where I'm feeling super stressed and I feel this shift in my mind state, or I feel like I'm avoiding or I'm super anxious, that's when I will usually take a time or take a day to myself just to recuperate. And I used to be very bad at this. And it's something that we all can work on is scheduling days, just a day here or a day there, planning your day. So that's what I tried to do when I would talk with my bosses. We would plan to take a day off for the month. And that way you're not just waiting for your 2 weeks vacation. And so planning mental health days to refocus, I have found has been super helpful. Even if it might not be stressful, it's still good to take a day off here and there to reset. And so I found scheduling certain days off that aren't just the weekend were super beneficial and helpful to me. And I think also as well, I was thinking back to a situation where during the hurricane, I'm in evacuation zone A. And so we actually evacuated and left the county. And so how it worked at our last organization, if you were in an evacuation zone, basically there was an office closure, so you weren't expected to work even if you were salary. Well, there was an important deadline that came up, but I found that this situation was going on was more important and more pertinent. And unfortunately, the hurricane came at a bad time and I missed a deadline that should have been met. But I felt like at that time it was something that was more important. So I would encourage what I could have done differently is maybe had a conversation with my boss. So I don't encourage, it's never great to miss deadlines. And if you know that's the case, is to have that conversation with your boss or to have someone that you can delegate that can do it as well.
Yeah, no, communication is often the what is required in so many situations, and I'm sorry to hear that you were in evacuation zone A. Those of you listening who are not from Florida, we give letters to our names. The flood zone one is actually in my backyard, but not on my house. But we all know these things when we have to evacuate. My daughter is in evacuation zone A, so she will be coming to my house in the next hurricane. It's not if, it's when. We do live in South Florida.
Yeah, stressful times.
Absolutely. So, two more questions. The first one is, if you had a magic wand, I like to find the pebble in the shoe. What's one thing that you could suggest to the listeners that you've done differently? And it's a little thing, but it's made a big, big difference in maintaining your work-life balance.
Honestly, I think it's something that I talked about earlier, and that's healthy eating and exercise. I honestly feel like that has been the key for me for making such a big turnaround. Because if we're not taking care of ourselves, then we're not gonna feel great. We're not gonna be, like I said, we're not gonna be productive in the workplace. And so if I could wave a magic wand, I would say we need to do a better job at taking care of ourselves, finding your hobby, finding what interests you, and finding activities that aren't just work. So your badge of honor or your identity is not just in your work, but there's so many things that we enjoy, that we like doing, and that we need to still experience those. So that is what I would say. I think that is the number one crucial thing is diet and activities.
So for me, I think that my one thing, kind of my magic wand moment, was when I gave myself permission to do things that had no real benefit. And what I mean by that is I used to, in the car, I would take work meetings, I'd listen to my professional books and things like that. And then at a certain point, I said, you know what? I'm already stressed out because I'm sitting in traffic. And now I listen to books for pleasure in the
Yeah.
car. And it sounds so small, but it just now I can sit in the car and I have a moment of peace as I'm driving and it works for me. And so that was one thing, very small change, very big difference. Gave me some additional perspective.
So you found when traveling for me, I would like to do podcasts, but also music.
Mhm.
I found that just listening to the music loud and going to work or leaving work, that kinda helped me decompress and get through my day. So music, podcast, going for a walk, those are just simple things that we can do every day.
For sure. And if you live in Florida, Central Florida, you can go over and visit your friend the mouse and have a Dole Whip on the hub.
Yeah.
So the last question I'm going to ask you, Nicco, is what questions did I not ask you that you think that the listeners really need to hear? What is something that I missed that you think is really important?
That is a good question. I would definitely it wasn't a direct question, but the focus on mental health, how can we take care of ourselves better mentally, physically, spiritually, or however it may look in your life? Because if we're not grounded and if we're not working on ourselves, then I think it's really gonna be hard to have that work-life balance if we're not working on if we're not trying to improve every day. Um, and then the other thing is not living in a world of negativity. A lot of times when we're stressed, we want to say, "Oh, this day is awful," or "This isn't going well." And when you keep repeating those things, you're gonna live it. And so something that has really helped me is positive affirmations. Telling yourself that you love yourself, or telling yourself today is going to be a good day, or being thankful for the things you have, to have a roof over your head, to have a car, to be healthy. So I think that's also an important question is how do we get from having a negative mindset to more of a positive mind state?
I love that. It goes back to you have a choice every day. You can choose to be a victim or you can choose to be a victor. You can focus on what's going wrong or you can focus on what's gone right. And I had a former supervisor who used to tell me, anytime I wake up on this side of the earth, it's a good day.
Yeah.
So, really looking at that perspective taking for sure. And I think the other thing is giving yourself grace.
Yeah.
It's okay not to be perfect at things. I say that as a closet perfectionist, maybe not so closet of a perfectionist, but as a perfectionist, it's very hard for me when things aren't perfect. And I had to learn to give myself grace and say there are some things I'm just not good at, like work life balance. I'm
Yeah.
just not very good at it. So, well, I appreciate you being open and honest and giving the feedback on work life balance. I'm going to continue to work on it and make sure that it is a priority in my life. And I hope the listeners got some great tips and some thoughts around how they can incorporate these things into their day to day interactions with others. And we welcome you to put your comments in whatever format you're watching this or listening to this on. We would love to hear from you if there are topics you'd like us to cover. And Nicco, any last thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I would just say let us know, how do you manage work-life balance? What are some things that you do to keep yourself grounded? Let us know in the comments. Super excited to share this conversation with you. I hope you took a lot out of it and maybe can apply some things. And we look forward to these important ongoing conversations.
Wonderful. If you haven't subscribed to us yet, we hope that you will subscribe. If you wouldn't mind sharing any content you found applicable to your world with someone you think can benefit from it. If you liked this session, I hope you will let us know by hitting whatever the like button is within your format. And again, we welcome you to join both of us on our other social media avenues. We'll put the description of where you can find us in the description of this podcast. And we hope that you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.